Hey sports fan. So I was recently criticizing like book talk books and it got me to thinking about the kind of books that I used to really like versus the kinds of books I like now. So I thought it might be kind of fun to go through my Goodreads and look at books that I gave high ratings like a million years ago and see if I think that they still hold up. So I've got my Goodreads pulled up here and I have it by date finished and then like reversed. So these are some of my oldest books. Before you judge my book tastes too harshly, keep in mind that these are really old ratings. I started my Goodreads like a million years ago, back in like my early 20s. So these are books that I read kind of a long time ago, and we're gonna go on this journey together and see if my reading tastes have stood the test of time. First thing I'm seeing here is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, and I gave this book 4 stars, which I think it's a 4-star book. Sharp Objects is, it's not a horror. I guess you could say it's a thriller. It's kind of a mystery thriller. Gillian Flynn writes such bizarre, like dark, twisted stories without being grotesque or like traditional horror. It's more like the horror of people who have broken minds. Sharp Objects is about this woman who is a journalist, and there have been some murders in her hometown. And so her editor sends her back to her hometown to investigate and write a story on the murders. And through the story, we see this woman's history with her abusive mother and her mother's kind of like current day abuse to this woman's stepsister who is younger. I think she's like an early teen. We also see like the result of the abuse and the trauma in this woman and how broken she really is. And we also unravel a little bit of a murder mystery with a very surprising culprit. I thought it was like shocking. It left me probably curled up in a ball for like 3 days because the people in this book are just so mentally and emotionally broken. It's almost shocking to read about the things that they do, the things they say, and how they view their own actions. Like the lens that they view the world through is so shattered and insane that it is just like shocking, and it leaves you kind of like shell shocked after you finish the novel. I still think that this holds up as a 4-star, maybe even 5-star. I think I may have had some issues with like the writing, and that's why I didn't give it 5 stars. But I would say that Sharp Objects still holds up as a 4-star read. Here's a fun one. In the early 2010s, I gave Inheritance by Christopher Paolini 5 stars. Inheritance is the 4th book in the Inheritance cycle, which is the series that starts with Aragon, which is pretty popular. I still think that this series stands up. I still think it's a really good time. I think it's a great introduction into high fantasy. It's a lot of fun. It is not particularly unique or original. I don't think the writing is that impressive. The prose isn't great. In retrospect, compared to the things that I read now, I just don't think it stands up. It's not a 5-star book for me anymore. I would say it's probably a 3 or 4 star because I recall really enjoying the story. Especially in the last 2 books, we get more characters and a broader scope of this entire world, and that really helped with like immersion and just giving the story a little bit more depth and a little bit more to like sink your teeth into. So I do think the last 2 books are still pretty good and pretty enjoyable, and I think that, you know, this story has been told a million times because it works. I don't want to be overcritical of the story not being very original because there are so few original stories at this point. But I do think the quality is not quite as high as what I would give 5 stars today. So does Inheritance hold up as a 5-star read? No, not really. But I think it probably would be somewhere between a 3 and a 4. I really would still really enjoy it if I were to read it for the first time today, but I wouldn't think that the writing was like S tier. Here's one. In 2013, I read Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell and I gave it 5 stars. I think that Fangirl is probably still a 4-star book for me. I don't read a lot of contemporary, so I think when I do read a contemporary and it stands out as being really good, I might overshoot how good I think it is. But Fangirl is still pretty good. Fangirl is about a young woman named Kath. She's going off to college and she has a very, very tight and kind of codependent relationship with her twin sister, Ren. And Ren wants to be independent. She wants to have a college experience that's kind of separate from her sister and separate from her, life before. And Kath feels like she is just left adrift. She doesn't really know how to function without the comfort of her sister. Simultaneously, a book series that they're very attached to called, I think it's the Simon Snow series, and it's supposed to kind of be like this world's Harry Potter. It's coming to an end, and Kath is a very, very popular fan fiction writer. She's an anonymous fan fiction writer. So she is writing her fan fiction, like her final fan fiction for these books that are coming to an end. And so it's a lot of like closing doors in Kath's life, and she doesn't quite know how to deal with it. She's young. She's a teenager entering into adult world. At its heart, Fangirl is a coming of age story of this young woman who is closing all of these chapters in life, and she's entering into new chapters with like a lot of apprehension. And we go on kind of a self-discovery journey with Kath, where she might be finding love, and she also finds a self-confidence that is within herself, because previously she took her confidence from other places. She took it from her home life, from her twin sister, and her anonymous fan fiction, and now she's having to find confidence as an individual in the world. Now that I've talked about it, I think that Fangirl might still stand as a 5-star read for me, because it really is such a beautiful coming of age story, especially for young women or people who are a little bit more insecure, a little bit more introverted. It's just a really good book. I have 2 back-to-back here. I have Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which I gave 5 stars. In retrospect, I think Uprooted might be a 4-star read for me. I do still really like Uprooted, but I think that I may have read it too quickly. I think I would need to reread it to give it a really good, like, critical rating. Just pulling from my memory, I think it's probably sitting around a 4. It's still very good, and I still enjoyed it quite a bit. Uprooted is about a young woman who lives in a village right on the edge of a forest that they're not supposed to go into. And there is a wizard who lives in a tower, and every however many years, he takes a young woman from the village to his tower. The villagers don't know what happens to her because she never comes back. They assume that he might experiment on her, kill her, marry her, and then dispose of her or something. They don't know. Everyone in the village expects that our main character's best friend will be taken because she's like beautiful and personable, she's talented, she's smart, she's funny, like everything about her is positive and great, everybody loves her. And our main character is kind of like a little bit quick to anger. She's not particularly beautiful. People don't love her quite as much, and she's fine with it. But what ends up happening is that the wizard comes, and instead of picking the woman everyone expects him to pick, he instead picks our hero, and she is taken to the wizard's tower with him. And so much about the world that she lives in is opened up to her, and she goes on kind of a wild adventure, and she finds strength that she didn't know she had. And we do get a little bit of like kind of a beautiful sisterhood between these two friends that I didn't expect to happen, but it was really nice to see happen. And I remember really enjoying that about this book, and it actually wishing that there was more of that friendship. So I think that this book still stands as probably a 4-star. I don't know if the writing stands up to a 5-star rating, but definitely at least 4. Next on here, I have Cinder by Marissa Meyer, and I read this in 2015, and I gave it 4 stars. if I read Cinder today, I would probably give this 2 stars, maybe 3, because it's not bad, but in retrospect, it's definitely not something that I would read today. Cinder is somewhat of a romantasy, and that is just something that I'm trying to move away from. I think had Book Talk been around in 2015 when I was reading books like Cinder, I would probably be a Book Talk romantasy girl and love every minute of it. But my tastes have really changed since then. I genuinely don't even remember that much of what Cinder is about. Instead of trying to pull from memory, I'm just gonna pull from Goodreads. Cinder, a gifted mechanic, is a cyborg. She's a second-class citizen with a mysterious past, reviled by her stepmother and blamed for her stepsister's illness. But when her life becomes intertwined with the handsome Prince Kai, she suddenly finds herself at the center of an intergalactic struggle and a forbidden attraction. That doesn't really tell you much of anything about this book. It's a science fantasy, and I am playing very fast and loose with the term science here. It's a fantasy that takes place in space. How about that? There are androids and implants and mechanical appendages and all sorts of silly things. I think there's like a virus or a mysterious illness. Girl, I don't remember. But if I were to read Cinder today, it'd probably be a 2 star for me. I probably wouldn't even like it, but I wouldn't hate it because I don't think that it's technically bad. I think that it's just not something I enjoy. Next up in 2015, I also read The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, and I gave it 4 stars. Now, in 2015, I was in my 20s. I was not the target audience for The Lightning Thief when I read it, but it was something that everybody I knew had read when they were a kid, and I had never read it, so I wanted to give it a chance. I think that if you're reading The Lightning Thief for the first time, it should probably be before you're 20. I think that reading it when I was 20 kind of hindered me in getting into that story. I never read any of the other books because I didn't like The Lightning Thief enough to continue. Before anybody loses it and comes for me, I don't think The Lightning Thief is bad. I just think that I was too old for it by the time I read it. I think I rated it 4 stars because I felt like that was what I would have rated it if I'd read it when I was like 13. If I were to read it today for the first time, I'd probably give it 3 stars because it's a middle grade or young adult book about kids who are the offspring of Greek gods. I do think that it's not technically bad and it is written well and it was entertaining. I just don't think that that's something that me today would really enjoy the same way I would have enjoyed it when I was like 15. Here's a really gross one. I have on here in 2016, I read The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchison. I gave this book 4 stars. 1 star. This is a 1-star book, not because it's poorly written. It is written moderately well. In retrospect, this book glamorizes the nastiest stuff. It's so gross. The book is told from the perspective of a young woman who's been kidnapped, and she is being held and regularly assaulted with like a ton of other young women. This old, nasty, crusty man who is like exorbitantly wealthy holds all these women. They're healthy and they're well cared for and they like have things, but they are captives being kept like in a cave or something, or I can't. Anyway, when one of the women gets too old and is not like physically attractive enough for him anymore, he kills them and then like encases them in epoxy or glass or something so that he can preserve them in like their most beautiful state. It's freaking disgusting. You are supposed to be kind of disgusted, but also the way that the girl tells the story, it kind of like romanticizes it. I just think that the author didn't put enough like disgust into the story. She didn't put enough like vitriol from these young women and the rage that you would really feel if this had happened to you wasn't in these women enough. They weren't angry enough, I think. And I would never ever think to criticize an actual victim of some sort of horrific crime like that, because like that's not me for me to say. Everybody's mind is going to react to something like that differently, and I am not here to criticize actual victims, but I think in fictional victims, I do think the author could have done a lot better with how she wrote them. So retrospect, me giving this book a new rating, I would give it a 1 star. And apparently there are like 4 more books in this series, and I did not read any of them. Even though I gave it 4 stars at the time, by the time I realized there were sequels, something in me said, ooh, that's yucky. You should not read those. And I never did. I get very stingy with my star ratings when I like look back on books that I've read, and I am like much more critical once I've had time to think about them. This is kind of a random one that I barely remember, and that is Half Wild by Sally Green. Half Wild is the middle installment in the Half Bad trilogy. I gave this book 4 stars, and I'm gonna be totally honest with you, I don't really remember any of it. I know that the main character is a young man who is like the progeny of like an evil warlock, but that's about all I remember. So I'm going to take to Goodreads and give you a little bit of the Goodreads blurb for Half Bad. In a modern day England where 2 warring factions of witches live alongside humans, one 16-year-old boy is trapped between the 2 sides. Nathan's father is the world's most powerful and cruel witch, and his mother is dead. Both groups of witches see Nathan as their greatest threat or their greatest weapon. Trapped in a cage, beaten and handcuffed, he must escape before his 17th birthday, at which point he will receive 3 gifts from his father and come into his own as a witch, or else he will die. I don't remember much of anything about these books except the very, very end, but I see in my Goodreads that I gave the first one 3 stars, the second one 4 stars, and then the third one another 3 stars. My camera battery died, so I'm just going to try to pick right back up where I left off. And I think the last thing that I was talking about was Half Wild by Sally Green. Yes, I had to double check. I gave this 4 stars. I don't know why. I genuinely can't even remember it. When I think back on it, I don't have like a lot of positive thoughts about the book. If I read it today, I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much. There must have been something specific, but I didn't write a review, so I have no idea. Moving on. In 2017, I gave 5 stars to Winter's Bone by Daniel Woodrell, and I stand by that. I think that Winter's Bone is an amazing novel. It's very short, so if you're curious about it, I would say just take the chance and read it, because it's very, very good. If you like stories that are a little bit bleak and bitter, then you'll probably like it. Winter's Bone is about a young woman named Ree Dolly. She lives in like Appalachia. Her father is a career criminal, and he has disappeared. You know, he comes and goes, and he's been gone for a while, but it turns out that he put the home that Ree and her mother and her 2 younger siblings live in up as collateral for, I think, bail, for a bail bond. The bail bondsman comes around to collect his due, and he tells Ree, you have to either find your dad, find his body, or find the money. He doesn't care. She's gonna lose her home and be like out on the street with her kind of emotionally and mentally checked out mother and her 2 dependent younger siblings. Ree has a very, very difficult life. She has a lot of struggles. This is just a short stay in her world, in her life, walking in her shoes for a couple of days. It's very good. It's definitely worth reading. It is a 5-star read for sure. Next up in 2018, I rated We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson 5 stars. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is still a 5-star read. It is a classic. It's a classic gothic horror. I love it. It's so good. I love Shirley Jackson. I love how she writes. I love the characters and the story. Everything about it is wonderful. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is mostly about a young girl named Maricat who is very odd. People don't like her and people are very suspicious of her because her parents died in a suspicious family dinner. In the same dinner, her uncle was permanently disabled. She lives at her estate with her sister and her disabled uncle, and her sister is very paranoid and kind of neurotic. And one day, a distant cousin shows up and he is really like forcefully inserting himself into their lives. He's trying to take over their lives and tell them how to live and take advantage of them. Merricat cannot let that stand. The book is so... Goodreads calls it perverse. I don't know that it's perverse, but it's definitely like delectably dark and kind of demented. If you like kind of weird gothic stories about weird people and unsettling events, then this one would definitely be for you. And for me, it still stands out as a 5-star read. It's actually probably one of my favorite books. In 2018, I also read Nosferatu by Joe Hill and rated that 5 stars. I think that Nosferatu still stands as a 5-star horror read. I really like it. It has some really creepy and scary imagery. It has some scenes that are so unsettling, they still live in my head rent-free today. It is a great example of his writing. I actually like it more than anything else I've read by Joe Hill. It's really difficult to describe Nosferatu. Basically, our main character is a woman named Vic McQueen who has sort of a troubled past, a troubled childhood, and a strange, almost mystical ability to find lost things. Then we have our antagonist, Charlie Manx, who is, for all intents and purposes, a vampire, but he's really more than a vampire. He just cruises across the United States in his old Rolls Royce, snatching up children. We see Vic and Charlie go head to head more than once. It is a wild ride. It's kind of told in like 3 sections of Vic's life. We see her as an adolescent, we see her as a young woman, and we see her as an adult. It's a very interesting plot mechanic that I ended up really liking because we really got to see Vic as a kid and the events in her life that made her the way that she is. Because if we were just introduced to Vic as an adult, we might not like her. She's not super likable. But understanding where she's coming from helps you understand her as a character. I think that Nosferatu is a great horror novel and still a 5-star read for me. Here's an interesting one. In 2019, I read Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray, and I rated it 5 stars. Now, Before the Devil Breaks You is the 3rd in a 4-book series called The Diviners. I don't specifically recall what Before the Devil Breaks You is about, like what specifically happens in it, but I do remember really, really enjoying it. I had read The Diviners and it gave me the creeps. I read it while I was house sitting for my sister, so I was in her house with a couple of cats and nobody else in the middle of nowhere trying to read this book at night, so I was getting like creeped out. Then I read Lair of Dreams, and I remember not being quite as invested, but something about Before the Devil Breaks You like really rocked my world. The Diviners is a young adult paranormal historical fantasy that is set in New York City in the 1920s. So there's a lot of 20s slang, there's speakeasies, we've got flappers and dancers and all sorts of silly stuff. But the story really centers around a handful of young people living in New York City who all have different abilities. One can see into, I believe, people's pasts if she touches objects that are important to them. One of them has like prophetic dreams or like can walk into other people's dreams. One has healing hands, like they can place hands and heal people. They all have like these very interesting abilities. At first, their abilities are being used for like normal stuff, like catching a murderer or curing an illness. But as the story develops, there is a much bigger underlying story, and there is so much happening. There is a big bad mega evil like supernatural entity that has to be contended with. Just a lot happening, and there are like relationships and there's race relations and eugenics, and all sorts of fun things. However, looking back, do I think Before the Devil Breaks You is a 5-star read? I feel like if I can't remember what I loved about it, that the answer is probably no. I must have really, really liked something about it, and I do remember The Diviners as being a very engaging and fun series to read, but I don't think that I can justify 5 stars for something that I genuinely can't remember, so I would probably have to knock it down to like a 4. It's not bad, I just don't remember it. In 2019, I read Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. Red Sister is the first book in a 3-book series called The Book of the Ancestor, and I actually gave all 3 books 5 stars at the time of reading them. Red Sister follows our main character, Nona, who is an orphan that gets scooped up by the Convent of Sweet Mercy. And this is not the kind of convent that you and I might be thinking of. At this convent, young women are trained in the arts of war and espionage and politics. I spent a couple minutes floundering trying to describe Red Sister to you, and I did a really bad job, so I'm just going to read you the Goodreads description really quickly. At the Convent of Sweet Mercy, young girls are raised to be killers. In some few children, the old bloods show, gifting rare talents that can be honed to deadly or mystic effect. But even the mistresses of sword and shadow don't truly understand what they have purchased when Nona Gray is brought to their halls. A bloodstained child of 9 falsely accused of murder, guilty or worse, Nona is stolen from the shadow of the noose. It takes 10 years to educate a Red Sister in the ways of blade and fist, but under Abbess Glass's care, there is much more to learn than the arts of death. And among her class, Nona finds a new family and new enemies. I don't know that that really told you much more than I was trying to tell you, but suffice it to say, Red Sister is action-packed. It grabs you and does not let go. It is just like action, 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 action. It's constant. It's so exciting. If I had to pick a book to be like an action movie, it would probably be Red Sister. And there is political intrigue and there is like mysticism and there's a lot more to this world. The world is vast and weird and will surprise you in the end, because I was surprised. I didn't realize what was happening in this world. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a really fun series and it is written well. I would not say that it's like exceptional. I don't think that there's anything that stands out to me as like excellent prose, but it's competent and it is entertaining. I would probably give all 3 of these books a 4-star rating, because when you compare something like Red Sister to another 5-star book like Morningstar, it doesn't really hold up. You know, I like Red Sister a lot. I think that it is a lot of fun and I would recommend it to anybody who enjoys like action-packed fantasy, but it's just not of the same caliber as some other 5-star reads. I'm going to stop there because that brings us up to 2020, and I feel like 2020 wasn't that long ago. So thanks for hanging out and chatting about some of my much older 4 and 5-star reads and finding out if they still hold up. If you guys have read some of these and maybe you gave them like really high ratings or really low ratings, if your opinions have changed or stayed the same, or maybe you disagree with my opinions, let me know. Let's talk about it.